This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Freilichen President's Day. Hope everyone's having a good day. We have a little bit of an abridged share today, so let's get right to it. Parshas Vayakhel. Just want a public service announcement. Again, we're soon finishing Meseches Peah and the Mishnah Yomis. If you want to join our group, you could go to our site, rabbidg.com, and we send that every day to Mishnais. It takes about 5 minutes a day. We're already finishing our second Masechta. Also, if you go to our site, there's a new venue of how to access the Shiurim. You could check that out. Okay, Parshas Vayakhel. Also, one more thing, Be'ez Hashem, we finished Mishnah Brura, and we're going to be starting the new cycle soon, Rosh Chodesh Nisan, in a more thorough format, 4 days a week. And instead of doing a page a day, we're going to be doing half a page a day, a little bit more thoroughly. Okay, Parshas Vayakhel. Parshas Vayakhel, of course, begins with the word Vayakhel Moshe. Moshe gathered the people, Moshe assembled the people. Which begs the question, Moshe taught Klal Yisrael all 613 mitzvahs, and yet we don't find that there was a specific imperative that Moshe Rabbeinu gather every single last Jew to hear every detail. We don't find that the mitzvah of tzitzis, Vayakhel Moshe, as kol adas b'nei Yisrael vayomer aleim, ve'asu lohem tzitzis. We don't find Vayakhel by tefillin or by any other mitzvah for that matter. Why specifically this week's parsha begins Vayakhel Moshe as kol adas b'nei Yisrael vayomer aleim? Why dafka behakel? Secondly, what does Moshe Rabbeinu teach Klal Yisrael? He teaches them Shabbos. Shabbos, he just taught that to them in Parshas Kisisa. Parshas Kisisa has V'shamiru b'nei Yisrael. Moshe already taught them the Shabbos, so why is he teaching them Shabbos again? We just did that. And then furthermore, of all the malachos of Shabbos, we know they're Lamed Tes malachos of Shabbos, only one of them is spelled out here and mentioned explicitly and specifically, and that is the lav of Havara. Why specifically is Havara mentioned? Yes, we know there's a machlokes Tanoim. Is Havara lelav yatzes? Was Havara written to say that while all the other malachos are kares, Havara is a lav? Or is Havara lechalek yatzes? Or is Havara written to teach that in order to violate Shabbos, you don't have to violate all 39, even if you just violate one, that's also considered a violation. But nevertheless, why Havara? Why does Havara need to be designated and singled out, especially in the opinion that Havara was written lechalek, which means to teach you only have to violate one malacha to be in violation of Shabbos? It could have said any of the Lamed Tes malachos. Why specifically Havara? Furthermore, Moshe Rabbeinu has two messages for Klal Yisrael here. Number one, Shabbos. Eila hadvarim asher tziva Hashem la'aseh sheish yamim. And number two, the Mishkan. Zeh hadavar asher tziva Hashem le'moer kichu me'yitachem teruma l'Hashem. So why these two inyanim? And then finally, question number 5, why Shabbos is introduced with Eila hadvarim, these, and the Mishkan is introduced with Zeh, this. Why is Shabbos introduced Eila hadvarim, these are the matters, plural, and the Mishkan is introduced Zeh hadavar, this is the matter, Lashon Yachid. So number 1, why was this parsha said specifically Behakel? Number 2, why is Moshe telling them about Shabbos again? Number 3, why is Moshe Rabbeinu specifically spelling out Havara? Number 4, why is Moshe telling them these two messages, Shabbos and the Mishkan? And why does Shabbos begin with Eila and the Mishkan begin with Zeh? So let's begin with the approach of Rabbi Shlomo Kluger in his Sefer Imrei Shefer. If I'm not mistaken, Rabbi Shlomo Kluger wrote a few hundred Sfarim, one of the all-time most prolific writers. They now have a sefer from Rav Shlomo Kluger on Parshas Bereshis, Parshas Noach, Parshas Lech Lecha, a sefer on Parshas Vayera. He has a sefer on each of the Parshios of Sefer Bereshis, and he begins as follows. Why did Moshe Rabbeinu gather all of Klal Yisrael, a lashon that we don't find by any other mitzvah until this point? Says Reb Shlomo Kluger, this is in the aftermath of the Egel. And we find by the Chet HaEgel, Vayarham ki vayshesh Moshe alaredes min hahar vayikahel ham. And the people gathered. Vayikahel, they gathered. So they made the Egel Vayakhel. They gathered to Aaron. So now that Hashem is commanding Moshe to mechaper for the Egel, that keneged the zahav that they gave to the Egel, Hashem is commanding that they give zahav to the Mishkan as a kapara for the Egel. As we know, Ela Mishkan, Ela Pekudei HaMishkan, Mishkan HaEidus, that the Mishkan was Eidus, that Hashem forgave them for the Chet HaEgel. So since the Chet HaEgel was Bekehila, Bekahal Rav, Timechaper on the Vayakhel, Vayikahel, so Moshe Rabbeinu, Dafka, Vayakhel Moshe, Mechuvan Zeh, Keneged Zeh, Mamish. Just like over there it's Vayikahel Ha'am, here it's Vayakhel Moshe. Says Rav Shlomo Kluger, now it comes out beautiful. Because what did Klal Yisrael say by the Egel? They said, Vayikach miyadam vayotzar sebacher vayaseu Egel masecha vayoymiru Eila Elohecha Yisrael asher ha'elucha me'eretz Mitzrayim. They said Eila. The Chet Egel was introduced with the word Eila. So Moshe Rabbeinu comes, number one, Vayakhel. And number two, Eila Hadvarim. Guys, we gotta be masakin this. We need to use the exact same lashon. And by the way, we know Moshe Rabbeinu was the master, was very specific always to use designated terminology to be mechaper keneged the chet. As we know, why did Moshe Rabbeinu say Oz Yashir Moshe? Why did Moshe Rabbeinu say Oz Yashir Moshe? So the Chazal tell us because Moshe Rabbeinu sinned with the word Oz. He said, Umei Oz basi el paroi ledaber bishmecha heira la'amazeh. So Moshe Rabbeinu sinned with the word Oz. So Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to be mesakin and mechaper with the word Oz. So since Moshe Rabbeinu's mahalach was to use the same word to be mesakin, the word that he used inappropriately, therefore Moshe Rabbeinu says Eila hadevarim, because the Egel was made with the word Eila. But let's take this a little further, because if you look in Sefer Nehemiah, we'll find that Klal Yisrael used a different word when they made the Egel. Namely, the pasuk says in Nehemiah, Av ki asu lohem Egel masecha vayoymiru Zeh Elohecha asher helcha me'eretz Mitzrayim vayasu ne'atzois gedol lo'is. It said, Zeh Elohecha, this is your God. So it's a little bit of a stira. In the Chumash they said, Eila, these are your God. And here in the Navi, they said, Zeh Elohecha. Therefore, says Rav Shlomo Kluger, how do we reconcile the stira between Kisisa and Nehemiah? He says very simply, there were two groups of Klal Yisrael. Those who are not on such a low madrega, so they didn't abandon and forsake Hashem entirely, but they were mishtatef avodah zara with God. They were mishtatef avodah zara with the Ribbono Shel Olam. It's called shituf. So their shituf was Eila Elohecha Yisrael. We're not abandoning God, we're not forsaking God, but we're saying that these are also, the Egel is also God. So they said the word Eila. But then you had Oivdei Avodah Zara, who served the Egel solely, and they abandoned God entirely, and they said, Zeh Elohecha, this is God, to the exclusion of the Ribbono Shel Olam. And that's why the pasuk in Nehemiah says, Vayasu ne'atzois gedolos. They did terrible provocations. Why is that na'atzos gedolos? The answer is because what's recorded in Kisisa is only shituf. Shituf is not as bad as outright avodah zarah. There is an opinion for a Jew to serve God with shituf. That is certainly avodah zarah, meaning to believe that God has a partner. That is for sure avodah zarah. But for goyim to believe that there is a creator, but he has partners, Tosfos and Shas implies that that's not outright avodah zarah, and accordingly Christianity would not be considered idolatry. The Noda B'Yehuda is of the opinion that what Tosfos means is no, even for goyim, shituf is avodah zarah. All Tosfos means is goyim, not that they're allowed to believe in shituf, it's just they're not warned against swearing by God and another power. But be it as it may, shituf is certainly preferable to outright avodah zarah. So basically you had two groups. You had the group of Eila Elohecha Yisrael, and you had the group of Ze Elohecha. So therefore, says Rabbi Shlomo Kluger, corresponding to those who said Eila Elohecha, Moshe Rabbeinu says Eila Hadvarim, and corresponding to those who were on a lower level, and they said Ze Elohecha, so Moshe Rabbeinu then comes and says Ze Hadavar, as Moshe Rabbeinu was the great expert at being mechaper with the precise language with which the sin was committed. But then Rav Shlomo Kluger takes it a step further. Because why did Moshe Rabbeinu specifically command Klal Yisrael about Shabbos? Moshe Rabbeinu already commanded us about Shabbos in the Parsha before. The answer is, says Rav Shlomo Kluger, that we know something very important about Shabbos. The Gemara says in Masechta Shabbos Kuf Yud Ches, Amar Rab Chia bar Abba, Amar Rab Yochanan, Kol HaMeshamer Shabbos Kil Chasai. Anyone who observes Shabbos properly, Afilu Oived Avodah Zarah Kedar Enosh, even if they worship idols like the generation of Enosh, Moichlin Lai, Hashem is Mechaper, Shenemar, Ashrei Enosh Yasazoyes Uven Adam Yachazik Ba Shemer Shabbos Mechaleloi, and Chazal Darshan Al Tukrim Mechaleloi Ela Machaloi. So Chazal are telling us that through Shmiras Shabbos, Hashem is mechaper for avodah zarah. Therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu, in the aftermath of the Cheder Egel, he's coming to bring takana and kapara to Klal Yisrael. And for those who said Eila Elohecha, he says Eila Hadvar. For those who said Ze Elohecha, he says Ze Hadavar. So what mitzvah do you think Moshe Rabbeinu would command Klal Yisrael? Certainly he'll command us in the mitzvah that's mechaper for avodah zarah, and therefore he gives us the mitzvah of Shabbos. Now, interesting, Moshe Rabbeinu only gives Shabbos to those who say Eila Elohecha Yisrael. For those who said Eila, Moshe Rabbeinu says Eila Hadvarim, keep Shabbos. But for those who said Ze Elohecha, Moshe Rabbeinu doesn't say keep Shabbos. Says Rabbi Shlomo Kluger very beautifully. Shabbos does not automatically atone for avodah zarah. It's even if you worshipped avodah zarah like the generation of Enosh. Now, how did they worship avodah zarah in the times of Enosh? In the times of Enosh, they didn't abandon God completely. They didn't forsake HaKadosh Baruch Hu completely. They believed in a creator. They just believed in shituf. They believed in God's partnership. So the avodah zarah that Shabbos could be mechaper for is the avodah zarah of the Dor Enosh. That's why Chazal say that Afilu Oived Avodah Zarah Kedar Enosh V'Shomer Shabbos Kil Chasai, Hashem is Moichel their Averos. But that would be like those who worshipped the Egel and said Eila Elohecha Yisrael, not like those who said Ze Elohecha. So therefore Moshe Rabbeinu comes beautifully and he says, Vayakhel Moshe, listen up, Klal Yisrael. You were Vayikohel on Aaron to make the Egel. Vayakhel, I'm going to gather you. You said Eila and you believed in Avodah Zarah b'shituf. I say to you Eila. And the kapara for those who worship God b'shituf is Eila Hadvarim, keep Shabbos, because Kol HaMeshamer Shabbos Kil Chasai Afilu Oived Avodah Zarah Kedar Enosh Moichlin Lai. Shmir Shabbos will only be a kapara if you worshipped Avodah Zarah like Enosh, not if you worshipped Avodah Zarah outright. But Moshe says, for those who said, Ze Elohecha Yisrael, like it says in Nehemiah, for those, I have a different recipe. For those I say, Ze Hadavar Asher Tziva Hashem Leimar. For that you're going to have to build the Mishkan. And for the building of the Mishkan will be a kapara for outright Avodah Zarah, but not for those, but for those who only worshipped Avodah Zarah, Kedar Enosh, they could use Shabbos. Now, based on this approach of Rabbi Shlomo Kluger, again we're saying that's why Moshe Vayakhel Moshe Keneged Vayikohel al Aroin. That's why Moshe said Eila Keneged Eila Elohecha Yisrael. That's why Moshe said Zeh Hadavar Keneged, what it says in Nehemiah, Zeh Elohecha Yisrael. I'd like to add 2 points. Another reason why Moshe had to gather all of Klal Yisrael. Gathering means he gathered them as one unit. Ba'achdos. We know the importance of Achdos, but Achdos specifically has the ability to atone for Avodah Zarah. The Medrash says, the Medrash Tanchuma says in Parshas Tzav, Amar Rabbi Lazar HaKapar, Gadol HaShalom, peace is great. Sha'afilu Yisrael Atzman Oisin Avodah Zarah, even if the Jewish people make idols, Va'oisin Chabura Achas, but if they get together in one union, in one chevra, Ein midas hadin noigas bahen. Midas hadin will not harm them. Shenemar chavur atzabim Ephraim. Ephraim is one group of idolaters, hanachle, and therefore leave them be. Therefore, we'd like to suggest that because Moshe Rabbeinu is coming to bring kapara for the chet Egel, which was the chet of Avodah Zarah, therefore Moshe Rabbeinu davka vayakhel, he gathered them bechabura achas to atone for Avodah Zarah. Just as an aside, I want to tell you a beautiful approach of Rabbi Menachem Zemba. Rabbi Menachem Zemba was one of the greatest Gedolim in pre-war Poland. My grandfather was a Talmud and a Ben Bayis by Rabbi Menachem Zemba. Menachem Zemba wrote a whole Perush on the Yushalmi, on the entire Yushalmi, on the entire Rambam, and it was all destroyed in the Holocaust. We know there's a very interesting discussion between the Rashbi and his Talmidim regarding why the Jewish people deserve to be destroyed in the time of Purim. So the Talmidim of the Rashbi said, Rebbe, Mibnei ma nischayvu soineim shel Yisrael ba'isar hadar klaya. Why the Jewish people in the time of Purim deserve to be destroyed. And the Rashbi said to his Talmidim, you tell me. So they suggested, well, maybe because they were nene from the Suda of Achashverosh. And the Rashbi said, well, then only the Jews of Shushan should have been subject to the Gzeira, but why were the Jews all over the world subject to the Gzeira? So they said, Rebbe, you tell us. So the Rashbi said, because they bowed down to the Tselem in the time of Nebuchadnezzar. Says Rabbi Menachem Zemba, there are 2 perushim for Mishlayach Manos. There's the perush of the Manos Halevi. The Manos Halevi says the reason for Shalach Manos is to promote Ava v'achva shalom v'reyos. Haman said, Yeshna yam echad mefuzar mefayra ben ha'amim. Haman said the Jewish people are disparate and segmented, and there are rifts in the Jewish people. So to show that he's wrong, we show friendship to one another through Mishlach Manos. And the other approach to Mishlach Manos is the Chumash Hadeshen, that everyone should have food for their Suda, that everyone should have food for Sudas Purim. Says Rabbi Menachem Zemba, these 2 reasons for Shalach Manos are dependent on the 2 reasons why the Jewish people were worthy to be destroyed in the times of Purim. If the Avera they did was that they were nene from the Suda of Achashverosh, so therefore we have our Suda to mechaper for Sudas Achashverosh, and we send Shalach Manos to ensure that everyone has food for their Suda. On the other hand, if the reason we deserve to be destroyed is because we bow down to Avodah Zarah, then the purpose of Shalach Manos is like the Rav Shlomo Al-Kabed says, to show Ava v'achva, Shalom v'reyos. And when you show Ahava v'achva, it's a kapara for Avodah Zarah, like we're learning here from the Medrash Tanchuma, that Gadol HaShalom, that it's an atonement for the for Avodah Zarah. Again, but for our purposes, we're suggesting that the reason why Moshe Dafka gathered Klal Yisrael ba'achdus is in order to bring kapara for the Egel. And I think this will bring us to a beautiful explanation as to why Dafka, the love of Havara, is singled out. Why Dafka lo sivaru eish b'chomash v'seichem is singled out in this context. The Shla HaKadosh says that the pasuk lo sivaru eish b'chomash v'seichem not only refers to making a fire and electricity, but lo sivaru eish b'chomash v'seichem is a love not to get angry on Shabbos. Says the Shla, lo sivaru eish b'chomash v'seichem yom HaShabbos, roimez la'eish ha'machloikes v'eish ha'kas. Shetzarcha adam lizar, a person has to be careful. Shaloi lahavir oisay olamis, you have to be careful never to let anger flare. Umikol shekain b'yom HaShabbos kodesh. Certainly on the holy day of Shabbos, she'ein boyer b'eish shal Gehenim. On Shabbos, all fire rests. The fire of Gehenim, the purgatory, is at rest. V'hakoyes b'Shabbos, one who gets angry on Shabbos, oyoisa machloikes chas v'shalom, or makes a dispute, goyim liyos chamas hagehenim boyer bar minan. It causes that fire should burn, and you will be lighting up the fires of Gehenim. So according to the Shla, the lav of lo sivaru eish b'chomash v'seichem is specifically referring to not getting angry on Shabbos. Now, in the context of what we're learning, that Moshe Rabbeinu is endeavoring to bring kapara to Klal Yisrael for the Cheder Egel. And that's why Moshe says, Vayakhel Moshe keneged Vayakhel. And that's why he says, Ele keneged Ele lehechiso. And that's why he says, Zeh keneged Zeh lehechiso. And that's why he teaches them Shabbos, kos kol asher mishas kelchasai afilu oived abed zakadar enish moichan loi. Now we understand why it says lo sivaru. Because what do Chazal say about someone who gets angry? Says the Rambam in Hilchos Deos, and it's an amazing Rambam, because this halacha is not found anywhere in Shas, but the Rambam says, Kol hakoyes ki'ilu oived avodah zara. Anyone who gets angry, it's like idolatry. So here Moshe Rabbeinu is coming to bring kapara to Klal Yisrael for idolatry. He's coming to atone for the Egel, and he's saying, keep Shabbos to atone for the Egel. So Moshe says, but of all the things you got to be careful not to do on Shabbos, in this context, the most important thing to bear in mind is don't get angry. Because while you're trying to gain atonement for Avodah Zarah, the last thing you want to do is be serving Avodah Zarah on Shabbos. The last thing you want to do, if I'm telling you how to be Mesaken and be Mechaper for Avodah Zarah, the last thing you want to do is to be worshipping Avodah Zarah on Shabbos. Therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu specifically warns them of Lo Sivaru Eish B'chol Moshe V'Seichem B'Yom HaShabbos. By the way, in Shas, all we find is Kol HaShoiver Kelim B'chamasai, Oy Mekarea Begodim B'chamasai, Mala Olav Yeh Beinecha Kilo Oived Avodah Zarah. All Shas says is if you tear garments or you break items, it should be like idolatry. But nowhere in Shas says that anger alone is like idolatry, and the only place it says that is in the Zohar HaKadosh. And there's a big discussion then. Did the Rambam, who says Kol HaKoyes Ki'ilu Oived Avodah Zarah, did the Rambam see the Zohar HaKadosh? That's a very interesting discussion. If you want to see more about that, you can look in our humble sefer on Pesach, on the chapter of Kas and Pesach, where we discuss different examples of where the Rambam says things, and the only source is Zohar HaKadosh. Now, not only does Moshe Rabbeinu tell Klal Yisrael about Shabbos in Parshas Vayakhel, he also told us about Shabbos in the beginning of Kisisa. And the Baal Torah Tamima, in the Sefer Toisves Bracha, he also points out that the reason why Moshe Rabbeinu told us about Shabbos in Kisisa is because since Shabbos is a kapara for the Egel, Moshe was coming to bring kapara for the Egel even before we worship the Egel. So listen to it, it comes out very beautiful. That the Cheder Egel is surrounded by Shabbos. You have Shabbos in Kisisa before the Egel. You have Shabbos in Kisisa after the Egel. Shabbos is a kapara for Avodah Zarah. Now in Kisisa, when Moshe Rabbeinu davened that Hashem should protect and save Klal Yisrael because of the Egel, so at first Hashem did not want to save us. But then Hashem taught Moshe Rabbeinu the Yud Gimel Midos Harachamim, among which are Hashem Hashem. What is the midah of Hashem Hashem? That Hashem is merciful before the sin, and Hashem is merciful after the sin. And then Hashem gives us a living illustration of how we see Hashem is merciful before the sin and how we see He's merciful after the sin. He's merciful before the sin because He gave us Shabbos as a tikkun and a kapara for the Egel even before we did the Egel. And then He tells us about Shabbos after the Egel as a tikkun and a kapara for the Egel after the Egel. Says the Baal Torah Tamima, Shabbos and Avodah Zarah are two polar opposites. We know that somebody who serves Avodah Zarah, it's like he violated the whole Torah. We know Shkula Avodah Zarah connected Kol HaTorah. Because someone who acknowledges Avodah Zarah, it's like being kofer in the whole Torah. Shabbos, we say in the Yushalmi, that's also connected Kol the Mitzvahs. As the Rambam says at the very end of Hilchos Shabbos, that Shabbos and Avodah Zarah are polar opposites. Each one is shakal connected Kol HaTorah Kula. And therefore, Shabbos and Avodah Zarah have equal weigh equally, and therefore, both as a tikkun that we shouldn't come to Avodah Zarah, and as a tikkun to be mechaper for Avodah Zarah, therefore, the Rebbeinu Shalom surrounded us with the tikkun of Shabbos. So it comes out very beautiful. The Egel was done Vayakhel, and therefore Moshe is Vayakhel Moshe. The Egel was Ele Elohecha Yisrael. The Egel was Zeh Elohecha, and therefore Moshe says Ele Hadvarim. He says Zeh Hadavar, and of course Moshe warns us Lo Savaru Eish B'chol Moshe V'Yiseicha Miyom HaShabbos. Now, Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz tells us, what is it about Shabbos that's moichel the chet of Avodah Zarah? And he talks about how in the times of Enosh they made a very fatal error. They thought that Hashem, in His infinite wisdom and power, He gave over the running of the world to various intermediaries and various constellations. And God, heaven forbid, He's not bothered with the everyday running of creation. He sort of leaves it to His inferiors. However, by keeping Shabbos and recognizing that Hashem created the world in 6 days and He rested on the seventh day, giving testimony and authenticity to God's control over creation, that is a declaration that no, God is intimately involved in the running of the world. Furthermore, says Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz, and this is a very interesting discussion, whether there's a mitzvah of simcha on Shabbos. Simply, the mitzvah of simcha is reserved for Yom Tif. On Shabbos, there's a mitzvah of oineg, not simcha. There's no obligation that one must eat meat on Shabbos. The obligation is only on Yom Tif. In fact, the Chassam Sofer has in a tshuva that if somebody has a bad dream, you're allowed to fast the Tainas Chaloim on Shabbos. Why? Because there's no mitzvah of simcha, there's a mitzvah of oineg. And if someone has a bad dream, it gives them oineg not to eat, to abolish the portent of the dream. On Yom Tif, on the other hand, there's a mitzvah of simcha. As simcha requires the consumption of meat, and therefore, even if you have a bad dream, there's no alternative. You gotta eat on Yom Tif. Nevertheless, there are many indications that there is a mitzvah of simcha on Shabbos. The Zmiros on Shabbos definitely are replete with references to an inyan of simcha. Menucha v'simcha la Yehudim, or there are other phrases in the Zmiros that indicate there's a mitzvah of simcha. And Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz is going with this idea that there's a mitzvah of simcha on Shabbos. And he says, really, astrologically, the constellation that is dominant on Shabbos is Shabtai, which is dangerous and portends peril and danger. And yet we rejoice on Shabbos because we recognize that God overrides and supersedes all the portents of the astrological signs. And that is how Shabbos is a kapara for Avodah Zarah. Because Avodah Zarah is the belief in the intermediary and God giving away the running of the world to go-betweens. And if we rejoice on Shabbos, that's because that's in recognition that God overrides all the various constellations. And that was the part of the sin of the Egel. The sin of the Egel was the Jewish people looked at the constellations and they saw that one of the powerful constellations was the Shiur, the ox, which is one of the 4 images on the Kisei HaKavod. And they sort of got caught up in the power that Hashem gave over to this Shiur. By the way, that's why the name of the desert that Klal Yisrael were in was Midbar Shur. And they thought that this would be the appropriate new leader. However, the observance of Shabbos is the declaration of recognition that the Ribbonu Shalom runs the world and overrides all constellations and all go-betweens and all intermediaries. Furthermore, Rav Baruch Simon in his Sefer Imrei Baruch specifically outlines how the Simcha of Shabbos is a direct kapara for the Chet Egel. As we know, that in Parshas Kisisa, when Moshe Rabbeinu came down with the Egel, and he sees when Moshe Rabbeinu came down with the Luchais, when actually, even before that, God told Moshe, Lech reid ki shiches amcha, your nation is serving Avodah Zarah. What did Moshe do to the Luchais? Nothing. And then Moshe Rabbeinu comes down from Har Sinai and he sees for himself that Klal Yisrael are worshipping the Egel. And what does Moshe Rabbeinu do to the Luchais? Nothing. But then the pasuk says, Vayar es ha'egel bi'as hamacholos. He sees Klal Yisrael are dancing. He breaks the Luchais. Says the Sforno. Moshe knew that just because the Jewish people served Avodah Zarah, big deal, they could always do tshuva. However, Vayar es ha'egel bi'as hamacholos. He got angry when he saw they were smeichim, they were rejoicing in the corruption that they did. Then Moshe Rabbeinu got really angry and he broke the luchos because he said, when you rejoice in your sin, it's very hard to repair your sin. When you've reached a madrega where the sin is so part of your reality that you rejoice that you sin, you don't even feel guilty about it, you don't feel sullen about it, that means you're so immersed in sin, you'll never come out of it. Then Moshe broke the luchos because he realized that it's almost hopeless. He realized that he will not be able to. He realized he will not be able to bring Klal Yisrael back, and therefore, the ultimate takana for the Chet HaEgel is Shabbos. Now, it's interesting. We know that Shabbos in general is the day that we rise above the Chet HaEgel. As we know, by the way, that all the crowns of Klal Yisrael that we got at Kabbalas HaTorah, we lost at the Chet HaEgel. We lost our crowns. But the Arizal tells us on the words, Yisnach Moshe v'matnas chelkoi, that every Shabbos, God gives Moshe all the crowns that we used to have, and then Moshe then gives back to the Jewish people all the crowns that we lost by the Chet HaEgel. That's what it means. Yismach Moshe b'matnas chelkoi. Moshe will rejoice in the gift of his chelek, ki eved ne'eman karasalai, because he is a faithful servant and he doesn't keep the crowns for himself, but he gives it back to Klal Yisrael. Shabbos is the day that we rise above the Chet HaEgel. And through, the Rav Simon is saying, through the simcha of Shabbos, we're mechaper for the simcha of the Egel. And in general, we know Shabbos. We once had a shiur that on Shabbos Rosh Chodesh, then Rosh Chodesh reverts back to being a Yom Tif, because the reason Rosh Chodesh is not a Yom Tif is we lost it with the Chet HaEgel. But on Shabbos, we're immune to the Chet HaEgel, and therefore Shabbos Rosh Chodesh becomes a Yom Tif again. But be it as it may, Shabbos is a tikkun for the Chet HaEgel, and therefore, in the aftermath of the Egel, Moshe Rabbeinu commands Klal Yisrael, like he did as a refuah before the Makkah and Kisisa. In this week's Parsha, he gives it as a refuah after the Makkah, that if we're Shomer Shabbos Kilchasai, Afilu Oived Avodah Zarah Kedar Enosh, Moichlin Loi, and therefore Moshe says Vayakhel, therefore Moshe says Eile, Moshe says Zeh, and Moshe warns Klal Yisrael about Kas, Loi Sevaru Eish, B'chol Moshe V'Yisechem, B'Yom HaShabbos. On that note, I'm going to wish everyone a wonderful day. If anybody wants to join us today at 5 p.m., we're back to the 5 p.m. Orchos Chaim L'Rosh. Mincha's a little bit later. You could join us on rabbidg.com on the Zoom for Orchos Chaim L'Rosh Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. And again, you could join us for Mishnayos. You could join the WhatsApp groups. Wishing everyone a wonderful day. Baruch v'atzlacha.
Thank you.
Baruch Tia. Kol Tov, everyone.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.